to Forthright. My guest for today's interview is Brian Burrow. He is CEO of Rethink Clean Energy, a local consulting firm, and he's here to discuss a recently released report titled Rethinking Clean Energy that was originally commissioned by Jennifer Thomas with support from Spokane Home Builders Association. And she was inspired by Spokane Sustainability Action Plan and the plan that came out of that was recently adopted by City Council. And I want to give Brian a chance first to tell us a little bit about his background and his company, so we know, why we should read this plan and pay attention to it.
Hey everybody, Brian Burrow here, CEO of Rethink Clean Energy. I'm an economist and project manager by training, and I've been working on clean energy systems for about 10 years in different stages of development for new renewable energy technologies. And this has been a lifelong passion of mine, the idea of being able to balance a community and use our waste streams as sources for renewable energy. And so I'm happy to be able to share some of that with folks in Spokane to see how we can hit some of our goals ahead. It's a challenging pathway ahead to get to this state of net zero emissions, and that's where our company specializes.
Okay, so I'm glad that Jennifer brought you on board to take a look at that same goal, which is really what the SAP, the Sustainability Action Plan, is trying to hit. So how did you approach this assignment to look at how do we rethink clean energy? What was your approach?
Well, when rethinking clean energy, the concept is that a lot of times we may have a favorite type of clean energy. For example, solar, that may be a favorite in the area, but looking at the lifetime carbon emissions of some of these projects and the unintended consequences of say polluting landfills with the spent solar panels, really looking at the 100-year sustainability of a community when we talk about the net zero pathway. And so that's the approach I took here in Spokane, looking at what renewable resources we have here locally to work with. We have our wonderful river here. It does give us zero carbon electricity, but it isn't always counted as renewable energy because of the dams and
well, there's always been controversy over the dams, and they've had, some would say intended consequences, others would say unintended consequences, but regardless of whether there was intention or not, it did interrupt fish cycles. And so it just did. And now some of the other proposals for renewable energy have the potential to also interrupt things that perhaps we're not seeing how important they are right now.
And so when we look at what we have to work with here in Spokane, in order to build resiliency as a community, we recommend to focus to produce as much renewable energy from within as possible. And so when I looked at the Spokane community, I started with what kinds of reductions and efficiencies can we get to create a new baseline energy need for our community. And we assumed we took a 25% reduction, saying if we all work real hard to save energy, we can probably get there. And there's some very practical ways to go about that. So it's not out of reach by any means. And then we looked at what do we have to work with within our city's footprint. And some communities are very good candidates for, say, geothermal or for wind or for solar. But in Spokane, we have an untapped resource out there at the waste to energy plant. That thing has a lot of opportunity here for us. And not only does it contribute 5% of our greenhouse gases in the community just by getting rid of our solid waste, but it's a little bit older technology that has the potential to do a lot of good for us here in the community if we were to update that with new advanced technologies that are available today.
Yeah, I found that part of the report really quite interesting because I hadn't thought about other ways of turning waste into energy besides burning it, which is what we're doing now. But the whole concept of using pyrolysis, it's a gasification process to produce a fuel that can go back in and serve the community in other places. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about where is that being used, some other places that we could go to look at.
Yeah, quite a few. We have a good demonstration plant here in Washington State for a for a technology similar to it. And this one that I'm working with, this company is based out of Florida, and has one of the, well, I should say one of the technologies that I used in the studies is based out of Florida, and has over 30 of these systems online around the world, currently converting plastics into diesel fuel. And something like that up here in the Spokane community would be ideal, because we have a community that wants to recycle. We want to put plastics in that recycling bin. And not only can we find a solution for those plastics so people feel good about getting it in the right place, but we can offset our greenhouse gases quite a bit by reducing our use of fossil fuels and replacing those fuels using resources within our own boundaries. And so it gives us greater resiliency as a community and greater price control using our own garbage that we're currently burning.
I think one of the things about this report is that you're really approaching it from that economic sustainability. Can we afford to keep this up? And I think that was also quite fascinating. Reducing, yep, definitely we can start first at seeing how much we can just cut back on using. My understanding about plastics is that them here, but I believe the U.S. has been relying on shipping a lot of that to China, and that's not happening anymore. So now, there's been stories about, oh, look, they're just taking the recycling to the dump. But this is a way of getting past that and saying, okay, so here's another way of recycling that material that doesn't just produce a chopped up filling for your latest winter coat, but it also just turns back into fuel, which we still need.
Yeah, the building blocks of plastics are the same building blocks used in transportation fuels. You're just looking at the carbon and hydrogen. And so you can take plastics very, very easily and convert it into a diesel fuel, or garbage. In the industry, we call it MSW, municipal solid waste. We can convert that into hydrogen gas for building heat, or for transportation fuels, and even jet fuel for fuel to service the airport. And so using our own garbage streams here, we can tackle some of the most difficult sectors, such as transportation, that accounts for 47% of our greenhouse gases. We can offset that significantly by producing biofuels and alternative fuels right here within our own footprint. And so when we look at the greater net zero emissions pathway, some of the mistakes that communities make is oftentimes they underestimate the capital expenditures involved to get there. And they may have these great goals, and then not quite the direction with matching these expensive projects to the intended outcome. And another common pitfall is really overestimating the integrity of the infrastructure. And in the report, I expanded on some of these more to really just to help the Spokane community avoid some of these pitfalls that we see in other areas. And in here, it's quite relevant when we look at the infrastructure, and how every winter we typically go through some kind of winter power outage somewhere in Spokane. And last year it hit my house, where we were out of power for 3 or 4 days, sub-freezing temperatures, and trying to stay warm. And so in the report, I talk about some of these dangers ahead to help facilitate conversation on these and further planning.
We're coming up on the 25th anniversary of Ice Storm 1996, and I'm working with some of the folks that were involved in the Emergency Operations Center, and we're putting together actually a news program for the Spokane Talks Media channel. So I've been spending a lot of time, we've been talking about electricity and our reliance on electricity and what happens when we lose it. In this report, one of the modeling items that you had looked at was suggesting that electricity demand in Washington could grow by over 2020 levels by 13 to 20% over 2020 levels by 2030. In other words, we're already looking at growing quite a bit before we even start to approach getting to net zero. What assumptions do you know what assumptions that estimate made in electrification of transportation?
I think that estimate is conservative. That estimate comes out of the Washington State Clean Energy Transformation Act. And honestly, when we look at the increase that we're going to see in electricity demand as we decarbonize buildings and as we decarbonize transportation, and we switch over from gasoline engines to electric vehicles, as we get rid of gas boilers and replace them with electric, these things that are ahead of us to electrify our community, we will see a significant increase in the demand for electricity, which will not only drive up the price, but will also put stress on the grid like we've never seen before and like we're unprepared to handle at the current moment. So there needs to be significant investment into our infrastructure to guarantee that, for example, if we electrify a home and we get rid of natural gas, what's the guarantee that the power is going to be there? We can't step back into third world conditions where we're burning our furniture to stay warm in the wintertime when it's 10 below zero in Spokane. We have to have a solution in place for that.
Right. And one of the issues with heat pumps is that although the technology is improving somewhat, a heat pump relies on extracting heat from the air. And when the air gets below, I think when it gets down to below, depends on the model, 20 to 30 degrees, basically below freezing, that heat pump is only as good as an electric resistance heater. You basically have baseboard heat operating.
Right.
Only not at the baseboard. So yeah, you lose you really lose efficiency as it gets colder.
I'm working on an interesting study right now comparing some east side, west side differences. And one of those, when we look at a house and look at a nice, efficiently built home using a heat pump, for example, in Seattle, we'll get different results than the same home using the same equipment here in Spokane. And it's important that we look at that when we build our homes here in the Spokane area, but also as we enact policy that may require substituting a reliable heat source now for something that is subpar for our winters here and leaves us no chance for staying warm. So I'm spending more time on that right now, exploring some of the unintended consequences of that and costs ahead.
Well, and that really is something to keep in mind for people who are involved in anything in the construction and design industry, is that the State Building Code Council is under some pressure from groups that have decided that banning natural gas is just a good idea, but without looking at those variations of region and of climate. The building codes have always recognized different climate impacts in different areas, whether it's snow load or temperature or wind or exposure to earthquake. And Washington State, I still remember this National Geographic article once that said if you took a rectangle roughly the size of the state of Washington and you placed it any place on the world, any place in the whole world, looking for the most geographic diversity, you would put it right here, because we've got everything from deserts to glaciers and a rainforest. Yeah, so that's 100%. Another reason why the one size fits all really doesn't fit well in Washington.
It doesn't. And, communities have different incentives to use the resources around them. Some areas of the state are bright and sunny and hot and are great candidates for solar, and other areas are full of trees and are great candidates for biomass to energy programs. We shouldn't have a one-size-fits-all plan for the state. We really should leverage the beauty of our diversity here and the natural resources that we have in different pockets.
Yeah, that could send us off in a couple different directions. There's some studies right now about, we have the tree density is trees are denser than they have been in the past. That cycle's been interrupted. We need to get back, and part of that is going to be removing and recycling in a logical way that biomass, and that's obviously not what you're going to do in Central Washington, but it might be what you do in Northeast Washington.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
One of the other things about the electrification is, I don't see this very often talked about, is the impact on when you get it down to the individual level. There's the grid level, right? There's this high level discussion, but when it gets down to individual houses, your report made a point about the percentage of the home inventory that is older. So older homes very often don't have that. The panel just isn't big enough, right? You can have an older small house that's got a 100 amp, 150 amp panel. There's no way that's going to accommodate charging a car, fully electric heat, and our expectations have changed. We still, I'm still not a fan of air conditioning, but we still have a climate where most of the time we are fine without air conditioning. However, when it gets hotter, or for those who are older or less mobile, that's now an expectation, and it helps with health, helps with a lot of things, but adds more electrical demand.
We have over a 100-degree temperature swing from one season to the next here in Spokane. A lot of folks don't realize that. We have to heat in the wintertime, we have to cool in the summertime, and to your point, that adds a lot of demand on the grid, just like we saw this last summer in Spokane when we saw rolling blackouts during the heat wave when people went to turn their air conditioning on in mass levels. As everyone was working from home because of COVID, more air conditioning use crashed. And that should be a warning sign to what's ahead. When everybody switches over to electricity and phases out other forms of heat, we should expect to see the same unless changes are made.
Right. We have to recognize that there is a capacity issue there.
Absolutely.
I'm going to scroll down here and look at some other things that came up on the plan. This one was an interesting point about modern high efficiency gas appliances can burn natural gas with less greenhouse gas emissions than a utility company can typically burn the same natural gas or coal to supply the needed electricity to replace the gas appliance. And I think that speaks to that, where does the electricity come from to replace all these uses that we have right now? And right now, 37%, let's see where that is. Right now, 37% of Spokane's electricity mix is produced from non-renewable fossil fuel resources. When I read the Rethink Clean Energy study and I see those numbers, that's clearly something that's got to be faced, is how do we replace that 37% at the same time that we're growing by 20%?
Right. And that's a challenge ahead. Spokane is growing so fast that we're going to have to take our expansion into account as we look at future solutions and plan for that. The first mandate coming our way that tackles that is in 2025, there's a no coal standard. And so at that time, Avista will be asked to decouple their coal-fired power plant in Montana and not send that power to the Spokane grid anymore. And what they do with it from there, I'm not sure. They could technically continue producing over there, but for meeting our statewide mandates here, it's no longer an issue. And so we will have to replace that energy from someplace. And just like with the plan to phase out the natural gas-fired power plants in the area, similarly, we will have to find a replacement for that energy. And right now, the current plan is to purchase it from out of the market. It's a good plan. It satisfies the plan. It gives us the renewable energy we need to check the box. But my strategy is a little bit different. I recommend producing from within first before turning to the open market for electricity. And the reason behind that is once you're on the open market for electricity, price control is really out of your hands. You're buying on the open market versus if you could produce the majority of your energy from within, you have a greater price control, you have greater resiliency, and you are the power producer for the area using energy from within. Currently, we're burning it. I mean, that's the other option. We're just burning it right now and just goes up in the air. We could put that to use and not be subject to the open market rates for electricity. So it does gives us greater stability as a community.
I'm coming to the recommendations. That's bringing us to that wrap up. You do have recommendations. I particularly liked your introductory paragraph to the recommendations, which is that we need ongoing monitoring, because I'm a firm believer that no matter how wonderful a plan is, anybody's plan, monitoring is essential to give you the opportunity to make corrections at the earliest possible stage before you've gone widely off track. And that means approaching every plan with the humility to know that there is a flaw in here somewhere and actually looking for it. But your first, you've got your recommendations in two phases. And phase one, reduce. reducing energy demand and looking at if we can address that 20%, reduce it to 15%, that's obviously a savings right there. And then phase two, produce. And that's what you've been talking about in using what we have here to produce new energy. What comments would you give to the public? We're going to put up a link for people to find this plan so they can read it themselves. How would you see public citizens using this as Spokane City Council and staff discuss the Spokane Sustainability Action Plan? Where's the opportunity to intersect with that plan?
The Sustainability Action Plan gives a good broad overview for community sustainability. It touches a lot of areas that this study just does not dive into, that are good for making the community a nice place to live. But this study hones in specifically on one subset of the conversation, specifically around energy reduction and greenhouse gas reduction. The plan covers these topics. This feasibility study dives a layer or two deeper than what they're able to go in for their study or for their plan. And in doing so, we present some tactical solutions to meet the same goals of net zero emissions and renewable energy, but using solutions from within our footprint. And it allows us to get there without sacrificing the natural gas that we need here until we have proper infrastructure in place to provide guaranteed power to homes at an affordable price. And so what you'll find in there are ideas for solar, ideas for converting waste into different types of transportation fuels and electricity to balance the amount of carbon that we're putting out into the air with what we're taking out of it.
And that's the definition of net zero in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm.
So
balancing the carbon in your community. Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just there are different ways to get there. You can balance the carbon in your community by eliminating carbon 100% from your society. And that's not always feasible when we look at trucking and aviation and just general transportation and building heat. We may have a close to zero carbon society, but it's pretty darn cold. We do have to consider that. And so the other route to go about it is just by balancing it with carbon positive projects with carbon negative to offset the emissions that we emit, say in our transportation sector, offset those by producing biofuel from our own garbage, for example. And it turns our waste to energy facility out there into a carbon negative operation where we are pulling more carbon out of the atmosphere than we are putting into it. That's where we really want to be as a community. Then we set an example for other places.
Well, I like the concept of trying to meet the goals within the footprint instead of outsourcing solutions outside of the community. So I
agree.
appreciate
Spokane is a highly innovative place, and we have the capability right here within our footprint to solve these problems.
Hey, well, Brian, I appreciate your work on this plan, and I look forward to seeing how this study can be used by people as the Sustainability Action Plan strategies are developed.
Thanks, Solani.
Thank you for joining me.